Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The topic this time is Workflow Automation, the Secret Ingredient to a Better Practice. This webinar is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center, and speaking today will be Ron Collins from Amicus Attorney. The Legal Technology Resource Center is an ABA member benefit provided by the ABA's Law Practice Division. You can find a variety of legal technology articles, guides, videos, and other resources on our website at lawtechnology.org or our blog, lawtechnologytoday.org. Also be sure to check out the ABA Legal Technology Buyer's Guide at buyersguide.americanbar.org. Ron Collins is an experienced attorney, a fellow of the College of Law Practice Management, and an internationally recognized author and speaker on the subject of law and technology. He is also the founder and CEO of Gavel & Gown Software, a company dedicated to providing practice management solutions that work the way lawyers do. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll now begin the webinar.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you to everyone attending this afternoon. Very pleased to be with you today and talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is workflow automation in the practice of law. And sort of by definition, it's one of those topics that certainly we as lawyers tend to think, well, you can't automate us. There's many things that can be, turned into machine-driven things and just turn a crank and out comes the output. But surely the work that I do as a professional attorney is not something that can be automated in that way. Well, yes and no. The higher level value that we deliver to our clients, I certainly like to believe that that's still true of. But there's an awful lot in the process of practicing law, a lot of the more routine matters and a lot of process-oriented work that we do that is essential to the end value that we deliver and that certainly can be automated. So our purpose this afternoon is to walk through some of that and have a look at what you can do and how in automating it you can make your practice better. All right, so the first question, of course, is why should I listen? Why would I want to automate anything in my practice? Ask the question only to give the obvious answer that, well, if you can automate, you can work more efficiently. And if you're working more efficiently through automation, you're going to be more profitable. You're also going to be able to work smarter. Your work will be more accurate because if you can automate things and make sure you do the automation right, then every standard step in every transaction or in every similar transaction will always be there and you'll never forget to do something important. Those are huge benefits. And really, quite apart from slides and making bullet points like that, I think this story is best told from a customer of ours that I was speaking to just last week. His name's Peter Morani. He's the managing partner of an insurance defense firm in New York City. He started out in his practice fresh out of the bar around 2001, sole practitioner, and what he had basically was his law degree, his briefcase, and his laptop with Amicus on it. Today, in 2014, he has 10 lawyers in his firm, but, and here's an interesting part, he only has 8 support staff, which is way below the usual ratio. There's usually at least 1 support staff per lawyer, more often 2, and the overall average is about 1.5. So one of the questions we asked him last week was, well, how do you do that with just 8? The answer is, well, we run an extremely efficient firm because we automate a great deal of our work. We're able to do that thanks to our practice management system, Amicus Attorney, and its automation features. He also said that he simply could have never grown his practice to that size without these features from Amicus. And that it really, when he could automate his practice, it allowed him to deal with a high volume of cases efficiently, effectively, and here's a key and with a very high degree of quality. So he's got a great law firm, and that's how he got it there. Actually, for me, probably my favorite thing of what he said about the whole thing was that Amicus gives me the ability to be a great advocate for my clients and still have a life outside the office. And if everybody here is a practicing attorney, you know what that means to you, and that's why automating. If you can automate and have a life outside the office, it's worthwhile. There's more to it than that, of course. Value billing is another thing that people have talked about for decades in the profession, that clients more and more want to be billed for the value of the work, not the time it took you to do it. And while that has been a lot of talk for a lot of years, ever since the recession in about 2008 or so, it's becoming more and more of a reality that that's how clients are asking us to bill for them. It's a good thing for us too if we can bill for a value for that work which is higher than the time value of doing the work. Which means that to be able to do that and do it profitably, you have to generate that value quickly. And of course, it does mean on the side that you want to keep tracking your time so that you can set your set or fixed fees profitably. There's more good reasons to automate your practice. Another one is delegating effectively. If you're a sole practitioner, this is of less concern to you, but even then, you're delegating tasks to yourself when you organize a client matter, and you want to ensure that you, and when you have staff helping you, your staff take every step required in each kind of transaction. Preventing mistakes goes a long way to delivering top quality value to your clients and avoiding, negligence complaints. It's also a very effective way to organize your team. Once you have multiple people in your firm, different people have different roles. And if you can assign tasks on a single matter to the person whose role or expertise is best suited to that task, your whole team is going to operate that much more efficiently and effectively. So, enough about the benefits. Let's talk about the concepts. When we talk about automating steps or actions in a law practice, there's many different things you could be talking about, including things like document assembly. And I know that the ABA Technology Resource Center has done a series of things on document assembly, and there's lots of resources out there available to you about that. What we're really talking about today is what I call workflow automation. Concepts around taking a series of steps that you do for given types of transactions and automating them so that they're quick and efficient. The first concept there is going to be linked events. In other words, the chain or series of events that need to be linked together. Then for each event or step in that chain, you want to automate the action within it, and then turn that into a checklist, one that can have dependencies or effectively conditionals as to when things might happen. And then the delegation aspect. So really, for the rest of our half hour this afternoon, those 5 concepts are what we're going to talk about. Let's start with linking events. Now, we all know that the steps in a given matter or transaction are very often, not always, but very often tied together by defined relationships. Very frequently, those are statutory. I'm a litigator, by the way, so many of my examples will be litigation-oriented, and I know that when my clients received a claim, I have so many days to file a defense according to the court system in which I'm operating at the time. And that's a statutory defined relationship. Claim received, deadline for defense must be filed, and you can define it very clearly. You're not sure when you're going to get that work done, but you know that's the next step. So many days before a motion to file a factum, that kind of thing. So not all relationships like that are defined by statute. Of course, sometimes you just have a personal preference. You always like to follow up with your clients about their bills for perhaps 10 days after you've sent them out if you haven't been paid. So you have a series of things that in order to organize your practice effectively, you will do things with a relationship like that. And of course, it's not one or two things. Sometimes there's a whole series of things. Again, to use litigation examples, the conduct of an action has a whole series of defined related steps that can be many, many long. Or if you're an intellectual property lawyer, filing a patent or a trademark has a series of steps over a series of years, often, that have defined relationships. To be a good practitioner, you want to make sure that all of those related steps are properly in your calendar so that you don't forget them when the time comes to do them. So it's a good idea to get them all into your calendar, but unfortunately that can be laborious. When you're talking about 20 different steps, you got a bunch of things to put in your calendar. Okay, fine, you can delegate that task to an assistant if you're lucky enough to have one, but what happens when that matter gets adjourned? Because we all know that in the practice of law, things seem to get adjourned 2 or 3 times before they actually get triggered and take place. If you put in a series of, be modest, 5, 10 steps into your Outlook, all according to the defined relationships of when they should take place, and they all relate, say, to a hearing, and then that hearing gets adjourned because the other side phones up and has a conflict, wow, are you going to move all 5 or 10 steps? And then next time, unfortunately, it's you who has to adjourn. Are you going to move them all again? Well, you can, and you should, but it's laborious. And here's where practice management can be a help. So enough slides. Let's have a look. It won't surprise you that I'm going to use Amicus Attorney as my example of how this works. So we're looking right now at Amicus Attorney Premium Edition, and I'm going to stick to the Premium Edition. Of course, there's a Cloud Edition, which is fully cloud for practitioners as well, but for this afternoon I'm going to be using the Premium Edition just so we keep it straight and focus on the power and potential without mixing different products. Right, so in Amicus Attorney, let's do something like we'll go to our files here and we'll open the Widgetco file. Now when I open a client matter file, it looks very much like a file with a business card and so on, and I want to go see my series of events. As you can see, this is a share transaction matter. I have a variety of different types of information on it, ranging from phone calls and emails and documents, legal research, and here I'm seeing my events. Any events that I see here are automatically in my calendar, both in the Amicus calendar and in my Outlook calendar, which means also, of course, on my iPhone or Android phone as well. And here in Widgetco, the closing of this shared purchase transaction is coming up on November 18th at 10 a.m. You can see that there were a variety of other steps relating to getting ready for that closing. I've chosen to schedule on November 19th reporting to the client on it, and I want to prepare for it starting a week ahead on the 11th and finishing the day before on the 17th. So I've got a start date and an end date all tied to that, and other related steps as well. All right, well, what happens? The share purchaser wants to put that off in order to extend their funding raising requirements. So I can open up that closing and say, all right, we'll move it from November 18th over to December 4th. You can see here that's now dated December 4th. Now watch what happens to this list of steps right here. Report to client on November 19th. When I say OK to that, did you notice how quickly that happened? All the related steps were automatically rescheduled for me. So report to client is now December 5th. Prepare for closing, it finishes December 3rd, the day before the closing, and so on. The other related steps got rescheduled for me. That's the advantage of linking events together. And you can link any number of events together like that. So that one closing might have a variety, 5, 10, 15 events just listed to the closing, or you could list events in a series chain. So A could be linked to B, which is linked to C, which is linked to D, and so on. Makes it very powerful. And as we said, as soon as I made that rescheduling, my Outlook got all of those new dates. Everything in my Outlook got moved that quickly for me, as it did in my smartphone, which is, really tremendously useful. All right, so that's the concept of linking events, and you can see once you've linked them together like that, how much more useful it is to have a chain of events and to make sure they're all properly in your calendar. You won't get lazy and just put the 2 or 3 main events. You can easily put all of them in. The next concept relating to automating a workflow is automating actions. So each given step in that chain of linked events we just saw has some simple or complex action relating to it. If the step is, appear in a trial, well, I'm really happy to say that the computer can't automate that for me, or at least can't yet or for the foreseeable future. But some of the other things that it can do are generating documents. We mentioned document assembly before. It can do that. Or send an email, record phone calls, go to websites, help with some legal research, and of course doing time entries. These are just a few examples. It's probably easier to get the concept of that again if we look at it. So here I'm back in Amicus Attorney, and I moved from my list of files to my calendar for today. So here you go. Here's my appointments that I've got on today. You see I'm in my webinar right now. And here's the list of tasks I've got to do. Preparing a cross-examination is due today because the cross-ex is tomorrow. That's not something that I can really automate. But something like call Janet Bailey or do some research, here we can get some help from the computer. And any given step in Amicus can be automated in this way. Wherever you see the do button, Amicus can do it. So let's just take something simple like call Janet Bailey. If I click on the do button, Amicus has created for me a complete attendance note on the phone call. It's got the number I'm calling, the person I'm calling, my name, in this example I'm Heather Gabel, the client matter that I'm working on, Bailey Reed Kipling, the date, the time the call commenced. It's got a timer running. And yes, if I've got my phone hooked up to the, or my computer hooked up to the Windows dialer and my phone works with the Windows dialer, it even dialed the call. But that's a fairly trivial level of things. It's all set for me to keep notes about the call right here, which helps obviously for a variety of professional reasons. And it's got at my fingertips my call history. So if while I'm talking to Janet, other things come up and I want to say, see all my previous calls with her, there they are. Or all my communications, because sometimes she emails, sometimes she phones, sometimes she leaves a voicemail or other message, I can see them all in a sequence, and if I want to see what that email was, I just have to double click on it, and there it is while I'm talking to her. So a variety of help in a simple step like making a phone call. That's what we mean by automating a step in a transaction. All right, that was simple. How about something more complex? Well, it can send an email very easily by clicking Do, and that will send an email through Outlook. Or something like drafting a retainer. Now we're into document assembly. On the Jameson matter, I've just been retained by this client, Jameson Inc., and I need to draft a retainer. So here, when I click the Do button, it launches Microsoft Word, and instantly a document has been generated, and it's offering to save it to my amicus. I won't bother with that. The concept, of course, though, is that it generated a complete document. In fact, it generated two documents, a covering letter to the client and the formal retainer itself. And up top, you can see it's got a timer running, and it did a time entry for me for that amount of time. Again, when we talked about efficiency and being able to generate more work in less time, I did that. The timer was at about 7 seconds when I was actually finished. That's efficient, and that's going to get me able to do more work in less time. I won't bother saving that, but you get the concept. So that's what we mean by automating steps within a transaction. And as you can see, there's other things like research and so on available to me too. All right. Now let's move on, because we're going to go through each of those points we talked about before and build up an idea of how you can turn these into automated workflows. So it's one step at a time. What I'm doing is illustrating the building blocks that, when put together, create tremendous power for you. So let's talk about checklists. You have a series of things that you need to do on a given type of transaction or a given phase within a transaction. These things have been available for years in paper versions. I mean, legal stationers used to print them on the inside jackets of file folders, so that when you bought your file folders from them, standard simple checklists were always available. But the magic is that today you can automate those checklists and be so much powerful and faster. And when you do that, it just increases exponentially. The good news is that you don't have to get very complicated with this. You can do it on the fly as you go along. So I'll give you an example. I'll go back to amicus here, and let's open a file. I've got a litigation matter here, Dom Co-op and Phillips Shoes. So this is a lawsuit involving a shoe store. And if I go to the event list here, you can see that I've got a variety of steps relating to a motion for production coming up. So I do lots of motions for productions because I'm always seeking a little bit more production, a little bit more documentation before I proceed with a case. So what I want to do is take all of the related steps to this and save it as a checklist, or we call it a precedent. For obvious reasons, lawyers understand what precedents are, and this is a workflow precedent. So I just need to select the motion, and there's a button down here called Precedents. When I click on that, I can either use a precedent. We're going to save this as a precedent. All it asks me is give it a name. We'll just call it Example Precedent. And it asks me some things about who I want to assign. We'll just leave that for now. And look at this next prompt. I love this part because we just selected the motion, but actually there's a series of steps, around research, prepare, submission, file motion records. Some of these steps aren't related, some are. I didn't even have to figure out which ones. It knew, and I say yes, and there. It's giving me a chance to put in a description, or other such things. if I have a firm with many people, I could list the people, the other litigators in my firm, in this case, who might be interested here, or just put in the litigation group, and then I'll just save it. And it's that simple. Now, next time I want to do a motion for production, I can go in here and say use precedent, and there's that example precedent that we just created. So you don't have to sit down and do a lot of advanced work or planning. This is not one of these things where computers can hold a silver bullet for you, but oops, sorry, you have to invest tens of hours in advance before you get it. You can just organize your practice as you go along, and then whenever you say, oh, I would like to reuse that as a precedent, you select it, say use a precedent, give it a name, and you're off and running. So how does that work? Well, let's go back here and open another file. We've talked a lot about litigation. Let's talk about real estate. Here's an area where so many people practice, and residential real estate has some standard checklists and things you want to do. Most lawyers today do charge a fixed fee for these things, and they need to be really efficient and not forget anything. So here's Harold and Blank are buying a house from Jonathan Biddle. We'll go to the events, and we've just opened this matter, so I've got nothing scheduled on this matter yet. But the good news is I've got a precedent for residential real estate. So I'll click Use Precedent, and I'm going to say, yeah, I want my residential real estate purchase precedent. You'll notice when I go to Use Precedent, I can see just my precedents or all precedents in my firm. All I had to do was click on that's the one I want to use. And then we're going to talk about this again when we talk about delegation. I can pick who is going to be assigned what task. And there's one more thing I need to do, and that is to tell Amicus when is this particular real estate transaction going to close. So perhaps it's going to close on January 16th. We'll say OK to that. And then what it's doing is it's taking the original precedent and it's modifying everything so that it's applied or set up for the new facts of the Blank Rebittal purchase, and here they all are. So all of those related steps came in that quickly with the closing on January 16th, reporting to the client. Apparently I like to report rather late on that, preparations the day before, and so on, all the related steps. Notice as well the do button. So remember when we talked about automating individual steps and we saw phone calls and document assembly, legal research, and more, those get saved with the precedent too. And there's one of the most phenomenal powers of an automated workflow. So not only did my entire checklist get brought in with all the relationships and other such things, you can see all the linked dates, but any automation or document assembly came with it. Very powerful indeed. All right. Next, we want to talk about dependencies, because so far what I've shown you are some fairly simple examples in terms of A to B to C, or everything relating to a motion or a closing. But as we all know from experience, it's often not quite so linear. Go back to my example that I used at the beginning about when you receive a statement of claim, you've got so many days to file a defense. Well, when you receive a defense, then you've got so many days to file a reply. You don't know in advance when you're going to receive that claim or that defense, so you don't know in advance exactly when the next pleading is going to be due. So you need to be able to schedule things only when something else is complete, or other dependencies or contingencies like that. Well, this is also very easy. So let's go to another file, Blank versus Biddle. This is another matter where Harold Blank is my client. And once again, he seems to have retained me for a bunch of things all at once. I have nothing scheduled on this yet. But I need to set up a preliminary motion on that. So I'm going to go into my precedent, and I'm going to click Use Precedent, and I'm going to say I want to set up a simple motion, or set up a deposition. I can't remember whether the deposition or the motion is going to be the one that I have set up with contingencies, so we'll just put it as a deposition. We'll say OK, and here we go. So we set the call client for dates for deposition. We set it to next week, but notice I've got a series of steps dated nil. So if we go to our calendar in Outlook or in Amicus, we'd see on November 7th a reminder to call a client for dates. We don't know yet when our client's available, so we can't yet set up the depositions. All right, let's say we make that phone call in advance today and we mark it done. So I'll put a little checkbox in that, and you'll notice immediately I get a time entry for doing that step. That's one of the other things that gets automated in these workflows. Now notice what happened immediately I marked that done. Draft notice of examination came up today on my list. I've called my clients. It's done. So now I know when my client's available. Next thing I need to do is draft that notice of examination. All right, let's say I've drafted that. Mark that done. Get another time entry. It will combine the two for me. And now notice letter serving deposition notice came on. So very easy then to have one thing follow another, but only appears in your calendar, only appears in your Outlook when the preceding task is done. If we open up the details of a task, the next one up being the letter serving the deposition notice, we can see all items linked to that. So when we open the link details, you can see that here's how you link things together. Serving the deposition notice is a master event. Filing it is dependent. You can't file it until you've served it. And then you can schedule the dependent event so many days before or after the master event and give it a deadline. And you can even regulate what happens if it happens to fall on a business holiday or a weekend. You can see things like you can relate it to a scheduled date, a deadline date, something being marked done, or I like this one, not being marked done by its deadline date. So if the deadline for receiving a defense is October 29th and you don't receive the defense by that date, then on October 30th, a task will appear in your calendar to note pleadings closed and sign the defendant in default, which is fantastic. In other words, you don't know in advance when you can sign them in default, but when a certain date passes the deadline and another event hasn't happened, it can take place. Or the last one is an interesting one, being on my list for more than 10 days. So you can actually set these up to nag yourself. If you haven't done something over a given period of time, you can set up a precedent that will remind you to get it done. So very, very powerful in terms of dealing with dependencies or contingencies, we could have called that as well. Roles and delegations is the next aspect of this, and I think you've seen that before. The benefit, of course, is that you get to assign tasks within a matter to the person who's most suited to perform those tasks so that you're more efficient and have better teamwork. So when we opened a file, we'll go back to Blank versus Biddle and apply a different precedent. When we go to use a precedent on this file, maybe this one's going to be a simple motion, you'll see apply the selected precedents to the current file and who receives it. Is it Heather Gavel? Is it everybody who was on the original precedent, or do you just follow the precedent? And so you get the choice of who gets assigned and who gets delegated the specific task. All right, so we've talked about this before. I'm not going to go back and demonstrate it again, but here's where things take off. Here's where you stop being a land vehicle and become an airplane, because when you can combine the automated steps within an automated checklist, you get an intelligent system for practicing law and truly have workflow automation that generates the kind of benefits we talked about, like that New York insurance defense firm at the start of this session. And then there are some side benefits that you might not have even thought of by being able to do this. So the last thing I want to talk about in terms of automating workflow is file intake, because file intake is a very specific but a hugely important aspect of your workflow. Every time you take on a new matter for a client, you need to open the file for that, and there's a series of things that need to be done, and they will vary according to the type of matter or transaction or case that the client has brought to you. So automating a workflow around that makes sure that all of those key essential steps get done first time, every time. So let's go back to Amicus Attorney, and I'll show you an example of how that can happen. We can click to create a new file, and it says, do you want to create a file based on the current file selected or somebody entirely new? We'll say Mr. Blank has brought us yet another matter. So we'll give it a short file name, and that we'll just call it example, and it's because we were basing it on the previous file. It knows that it's Harold Blank, and we had a civil litigation file selected, so it's going to suggest it be civil litigation. We're creating a new file, but you notice I didn't get a new file. I'm being asked for a few basics, and anything in red with an asterisk I have to supply, or it won't open the file for me. And then I click Next. Now, there can be a whole series of dialogues like this. Once I click Next, everything's going to change depending on the type of file I'm opening. In this case, I'm opening a civil litigation matter, so it's going to ask for some case details and court information. The one absolutely required thing is, what type of file is it that I'm opening? And I can put in amounts claimed, date action commenced, the court, title of proceeding, action number, all of these if I have this at my time of opening or not. I won't bother filling them in now. We'll just say save and open, and we get our file. But wait, we don't have our file yet. What we have is that workflow is continuing. This is an automated workflow that's saying, whoa, when you open a new file, there's some things you've got to do first. And the very first is check conflicts. So we'll just click the button. And it's pre-supplied the client's name, Harold Blank, and we'll check the conflicts. Not surprisingly, because we already have some files with Harold, his name shows up in our conflict search, Harold and his wife Maud, and we can see their relationships. We can see how it was found and the date we last dealt with them and what the possible conflict is. So you can open any of those contact records and examine them further. If they appeared on other things, you could see them there. It's simple, it's comprehensive, and you can also save this as a document to your file. The next thing it asks you to do is, this is a litigation matter for personal injury. There's going to be a limitation period running on this. So we're going to apply one of those precedents or workflows to Heather Gavel. Here's our delegation. When does the limitation period on this expire? Well, to be simple, we'll just say it expires in 2019. And we've now applied to this file a precedent. It could be one or more. And of course, we want to generate a retainer to the client, so we'll generate a retainer to the client. Once again, it asks me to save it, and there's the document already done. So what happened there is we'll now say, thank you very much, I've opened that file. And in a matter of seconds, let's have a look at the events here. Here's a series of limitation periods right up to 2019 that are going to appear in my calendar warning me of that pending limitation period. And it could have been anything else. The file is properly opened, the conflict check was properly done, a proper retainer or engagement letter has been created and sent to the client. So all the necessary filing opening steps have been automated and done. So I'm sure that my professional obligations in opening that file are met automatically, and that's a wonderful benefit as well. All right, so I ran through those fairly quickly in terms of giving you examples, and really those are just illustrations of the power of automating your workflow. As I mentioned at the beginning, what I've done here is I've shown all of this in Amicus Attorney Premium, which is our desktop or on-premise, as some people call it, solution, which is a very powerful solution that sits on your PC and works on your local server. Amicus Attorney also has a cloud edition which runs totally in the cloud on your browser and can be used on a Mac, iPad, any such device, and everything's in the cloud for you. And it has similar capabilities. We're going to be talking about those at a future webinar like this, but it was too much to get all of those in one session, so for today we chose to focus on the desktop. I really, really believe in this type of automation. I told you about just one client who has grown a firm from a sole practitioner to an 18-person firm in 10 years with phenomenal results and success. Automating your practice really shouldn't be a secret anymore. If you can automate your workflow in the manners I've just described, you can take your practice to entirely new levels. And as Peter Morani said, it can give you the opportunity to still have a life outside the office.